Hello, and welcome to my top 5 Pro Tools workflow tips. My name is Ewan, and I'm just starting out with SkillShare, and I thought I would introduce a few of the workflow tips that really help me every day in my Pro Tools editing and mixing requirements. All of this information is probably out there free and available, but I just wanted to introduce myself and use this video as a taster for the future courses. So I hope you enjoy it. I hope you get something out of it. And if you've any comments or feedback or questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch. So let's jump right over here into Pro Tools. I have a large session open, which is actually from a mix competition years ago from a company called Hofa. They're a German plugin and plugin manufacturer who held a mix competition at Christmas. The song was called Gaz Na Dran, I believe. It's Ganz Na Dran, a German pronunciation, excuse me for that terrible Irish attempt at it. But this is a very large session. I can't remember exactly how many tracks, but it's extensive. Plenty of wind, strings, vocals, etc. going on. So I'm going to show you some of my top 5 workflow tips with this session because it's quite large. It's the original edit of it. It was the session I used to get just a mix balance and start my top-down workflow. So you can see I have some ozone applied at the master level and some stems mixing. But less of that. We're going to talk about more of the organizational things and again the workflow tips that help me every day to get through this stuff quicker. So especially with a session of this size. So I'm going to start with some general tips first. So the first of those being the edit window switching. Now this is a simple one. I just don't want to run it by you again because it's so simple. It should be there all the time like muscle memory, and that is Command and equals to switch between your mix and edit windows. Very handy. This is the most common window switching I'd say you would ever do in Pro Tools, and this should be absolute, as I said, muscle memory to you every day because it will make things so much easier, especially if you like to keep your plugins in the mix window view, because as you probably know, you can show them in your edit view. I might do later more detailed videos and all of this kind of thing, but if you are switching to your mix window to access your plugins, then this is extremely handy. When you need to edit a track and I don't know, change an EQ setting or something, it's literally as simple as Command and equals and finding your EQ. So you can see here, even an extensive session though, that is quite tricky. So we'll go through a little more to deal with that kind of thing as well. So the next one is a very quick one that we should all know, and that is bounce. So that is Alt, Command, and B, and my windows automate to a different location. So I'm just going to find them here. So you can see that will bring up our bounce window. So I'll just go through that again. Alt, Command, and this would be Control if you're on Windows, and B. There's our shortcut. And here's our window would pop up in front of you. So you can choose your options from there and bounce out offline if you're post Pro Tools 11 very quickly. So that's just an easy one to access because I find I'm always referencing, always bouncing, always sending to clients, etc. It's very handy to have there, accessible really fast. You know, friend says to you, hey, can you get something out for me? It's as simple as highlighting what you want to export and off you go. So the next of those then is our tools and modes. So I'll make this quick. This is Command 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5, 6, and 7 in the edit window. So Command 1 through 7 will give you your tools up here. So you can see we have the multi linked on Command 7. We could access the drawing tool with 6, the scrubber with 5, etc. We can go through them. The other option here is to access the tools options. So if it has the little drop down menu that you can see here, if I right click, I'll be able to see it. You can just click the number twice. So you can see the magnifying glass switching between its switchback state and its normal state here. If I go to Command and 2 for the cut tool, you can see here it's going through its various states as I click Command and 2 again. So that's just a really handy one. Command 1 through 7 to switch between the tools. The ones I find myself using most are Command 1 and Command 7 to use my multi and my magnifier if I don't have a scrolling zoom function available to me. So those are the tools. The other short one in the edit window as well is only a very slight variation, so it's handy, is instead of Command Alt and 1 through 4 will give you your edit modes here. So if I go through these, you can see easily here if we wanted to switch between grid and slip, which is quite a lot in music, I suppose. Well, I suppose it's mostly grid, but if you are a confident enough editor that you're using slip a bit, that's handy, because scrolling up there, especially if you've a lot of screen real estate, is very difficult, I find anyway, because it distracts from what you're at. So you can just be looking at a detailed editing job somewhere and simply click Alt and 2 to get to slip, Alt and 4 to get to grid, and it's Alt and 1 to get to shuffle, Alt and 3 to get to spot. So it's 1, 2, 3, and 4. So my last really quick general shortcut is the what would we call it? It's the small view, the minimum view in the mix window. So if you do have a session like this, again, with a lot of tracks open, huge amount of them. The reason, by the way, I have all these tracks deactivated is for CPU, and we're just looking at a set of stems in here in the edit window. What we can do is minimize these tracks using Alt, Command, and M, and that will make them small. It will remove a lot of the UI options and introduce a, what will we call it, more slender view of all of your tracks. And you can simply undo this again by clicking Alt, Command, and M, and it will bring back your full width view in the mix window, which is really handy if you wanted to. I've often found myself simply mixing like this most of the time, especially if it's a very large session. So that's my general tips for Pro Tools. So I have a couple of more in-depth ones, and again, this information is pretty much out there, but it's just to introduce myself, and I thought you might find these things handy. So the first one is color coding. Now, I have an option, a preference enabled here to default the clip color coding to the track. So if you notice here, my keys are always in orange, my bass is always in purple, my drums are always red, my vocals are always yellow, and my strings, they might be guitars, let's say, are always blue. Those are my common ones. I can always see them, and when I open my sessions every time, I know where everything is, because they're usually, I've been on top of color coding everything the right way. So from the off, I know, looking at the session, oh look, this is the drums, here's some bass and guitars or strings, vocals, wind, etc. Now wind is an exception, so I've just put it in pink. When I tend to put any wind in pink, is the next color that kind of comes up and fits in with everything, and that's just because this session had it. But I always put my special effects then in green as well, and I count that as reverb and stuff, depending on how I'm summing a project together, if I'm separating the reverb and effects buses. So to enable that preference, you simply head over to Preferences, whatever that option is for you on Windows, and apologies for my window defaulting to elsewhere. You can see in the first Pro Tools Preferences pane display here, we have the default track color coding, which is where audio shows up as blue and the OGS is green. I can't remember, I think the instrument is a shade of orange or something, but that is the default behavior, and I tend to leave that like that, because it's very easy to recognize straight away what you've created when you've created new tracks and etc. That's always how Pro Tools behaves. But the one we're going to set is the default clip color coding now. So if you want none, it will be gray, and if that's handy for you, work that way, because you can then select your own color settings. You can color code them by tracks and MIDI channels. You can color code them by tracks and MIDI devices. So the audio, I think, would show up blue, and then the MIDI channels would be a different color themselves, and the devices. You could use groups, which is handy as well, because all of your groups will show up as colors together. The track color, the marker locations, if you wanted to arrange your session from left to right. So whatever color your intro, your verse, your chorus was, any clips in those sections would be that color, which is kind of handy. Or the clip list color. So that would just be Pro Tools automating the color based on the length of your clip list. The one we're going to choose is the track color, because if you get into the habit of organizing your session by colors all the time, as I said, and then click this preference on, so the default clip color coding becomes track color, and click OK on this, then any session you start, anytime you come back to a session, whenever you do anything, you'll recognize straight away what the track types are. And of course, this would be something as well to implement in a template if you wanted to create your own mix templates. I won't go into that here, but that's of course another very handy one, a very common piece of knowledge you should have, creating a template for yourself for different types of sessions. So I have templates where all of these buses are mapped out, they're ready to go, and they're color coded, and there's a few default tracks, like there might always be a kick, snare, and hats to start me off, and rack and overheads for the drums. There'd be 2-3 bass tracks to cover DIs and etc. There'd be some guitars. So I can just start away, off I go. I haven't even gotten to the stage of implementing plugins into those presets, except for EQs to clean up muddiness and etc., because I haven't got a distinct workflow yet for all of them. I have some tracks that I have saved into a separate session that I import to get their plugins from them, but I haven't actually implemented plugins into the template yet. So if you wanted to do that, you could have all of this stuff laid out, ready to go, and it's very easy for you to get started. Looking at a new session or looking at an old one, you'll just instantly recognize where everything is. So that's the color coding. Let's get into groups. So I'm sure you know how to group, but very quickly I'm going to show you. If I highlight a couple of tracks together here and I just click shift and click between whatever tracks I want to highlight. So if I wanted to group all these buses, I would hold shift and click on the last track I wanted to highlight, and then I can click, or I can use the key command, Command and G to group the tracks. So I'll bring my group window up, and this is the create group dialog that will result. So I'll do that again, Command and G, if you didn't know how to group. But once we're in there, we get our group name together. We can give it a unique ID, but we are going to be using this ID in the end. So the IDs go in alphabetical order, and I'm sure then you can group them in a number of groups. I won't get into this much detail, but you might use these in a very large movie session, for instance. So you can change the type of group behavior to mix and edit, or just mix or edit. So sometimes it's good to have just edit groups where you could edit tracks together. So for example, a pair of overheads that were in mono, you could edit them both together, but still not affect the mix window at the same time. Or you can do both. It doesn't matter. It's up to you. So once you have your tracks grouped, we can go to the mix window and use this handy shortcut, which is different to the edit window because single keystrokes in the edit window have specific commands. You can look those up, but they're kind of handy. What we're going to do is in the mix window specifically, we can use the letters corresponding to the groups, which you can see down here. If you don't have this view in your Pro Tools mix window, you can simply click this button down the left here to show the track list, that's what it says. You can show your track list, and below that you can show your groups. And in here, my groups, because I have this option selected, the keyboard focus, are changed by single keystroke commands on my keyboard. So you can see, for example, here my recording group, which is the stems. If I click on if I'm in my mix window and I simply click B, if I simply type B in my keyboard, that has turned that group on, which is really handy when you're in the mix window. But this does require this shortcut, the keyboard focus, to be on. So if I did the same thing, you can see it does nothing then when the keyboard focus is off. And this is for very advanced things, if you were making your own shortcuts and things like that, or you wanted to use a different shortcut, or enable this in the edit window and etc. You can if you want to disable this in the mix window and have it in the edit window, so you can use this option. The same is available in the edit window then in the clips view, which you know, it's handy to have on because you can search through it once you have your clips view on. But in the mix window, we're going to use the keyboard focus here, have that on, and click the letter corresponding to the group to turn on the group. So you can see my groups turning on here. And I normally have an all group and an edit group. So the edit group I could leave certain tracks out of to just edit tracks within a certain group. So you can see E here is my bass, and there's the bass all group turning on and off. So that's a really handy one when you're in your mix window and you're doing mix operations like setting levels, particularly let's say for your drums, going to your drum bus and you want to affect them all, and then you want to make a slight change quickly on one of them. You need only click the letter corresponding to the group, and then you can affect individual faders, and then you can click it back on and edit them as a group. So for example, my recording group is on now. I could edit them all as a group, or I could edit by clicking B. You can see it's the group associated with that letter, the recording group. If I click B, it's off, and I can edit individual faders, put it back on, and they're back to all together. So that's just a handy one that I'm undoing, by the way, to keep these faders at their same positions. That's a handy one for moving quickly through groups in the mix window and be able to perform group operations very quickly with just a single keystroke. So my next tip is drive allocation. So if we head here to setup, excuse me, it's disk allocation, but the same thing, and my window is going to open somewhere else. I'll drag it up. The disk allocation functionality is very useful for me, having a older computer at one stage that struggled with certain tasks, for splitting your content of the session, so all your audio files, or more importantly, if you were working on a video project like an advert or a film, for example, splitting your video files and your audio files onto separate drives, but the session knows where they are, and it has a little, let's say, memory map, knowing that, okay, my stems are on this place in the computer and my audio files are in another place in the computer and my video file is in another place altogether. So the most common example would be splitting your video and your audio files across two drives. This is because you don't want, of course, the most common recommendation to do with this is not putting your project on the same drive as the operating drive. So not putting your project on your operating drive, because your computer needs to access the information to run Pro Tools as well as the information to provide content in the session. So you want your audio files on a different drive so that the computer can access them from different threads of information, let's call it. This makes it much less CPU intensive to run large sessions, so you could even split your audio files in half between two drives, for example, and video and audio sessions together. Now, it does get quite complicated. I won't go into all the potential details, but you can see here quite clearly you would be able to click on tracks. You could, of course, shift to highlight them as usual, and you can select a folder. So you could basically select anywhere on the computer or a drive to use. So what you might do with this, I have my own way of doing it, but what you might do is to have an audio, video, maybe production drive, and store all of the parts of your project separately. Now you just need to be very good at file management in the long run and know how to archive your session, which is something you can find out how to do out there. I won't go through it all now, but of course, if you are having problems with a large session, then this might be an option for you to have a solid state disk externally mounted, or a USB that is record enabled, and put some of your audio files onto it to ease the CPU intensity of the session. So that is the disk allocation. It's another workflow tip for me. It really speeded up my computer. And my excuse my phone. That's horrendous. That shouldn't happen. First video, excuse me. My last tip is the memory locations, which you probably been wondering what's going on down here the entire time. I have the window up, and I normally have it in the bottom corner of my second monitor, but I have it here presented to you so that we can go through it. Now you can see I have again such a large session that scrolling through it, even in our minimized view, is quite a chore, and it looks quite intimidating when you open it, and it's just like, oh god, where do I start? I use the memory locations in the first instance, and I have a template set up with this so that they're always the same number, and they're always the number 1 and on in memory locations. Because if you don't know how memory locations work, these refer to also the markers that you would have in your sessions. So if I go to add another marker here, I have to bring memory location window comes up. So I just click that plus here next to markers. And if you don't have this in your view, I believe it's a right click, is it? Oh, no. Oh, excuse me. I have the memory locations window open. Excuse me for that. So it's a right click on the view here to show different markers of the session. So you can see you could have time code, feet and frames, samples. These are the minutes and seconds is obviously most commonly what you would have. Whatever one you have selected is what shows in your grid. Just as an aside, mine is bars and beats, so that when I'm working on the music, I see everything in time and etc. To add or take away the markers, you would just right click on this view, whatever one you have here, and you could click markers, so you can see it will show up there. And then you'd just click the plus on markers, and you will get what's called a new memory location dialog. And in that, you can see we have the number 9, it's location number 9. Now, and that is because obviously I actually screwed up creating this template. You can see that number 9 is missing down here in the memory locations window itself. So I must have deleted one and not filled in the slot number 9. So you can see, and it's obviously because of this session, because it had a wind view as well as everything else. So the memory locations work by literally having a slot that is a number. So you can see its number up here that refers to a function within all of these settings here, the general properties. So if you store a memory location and you click one of these, you will be, for instance, saving the zoom settings. You can save your pre and post roll times if you have those set up, and they're just an amount of time the session starts playing from before your cursor or after it. You can have the track show hide, which we're going to use now in a sec, heights, group enables, and your window configurations saved. So that'll mean that when you go to this memory location, it'll show you a very specific thing. So for instance, if you were going to be very complicated, you could have a marker in your song that was your intro, and then use the track show and hide to include only the tracks that pop up in the intro. Now that's not how we're going to use it, but that's another example of how in-depth you can get with memory locations. Now it's more in very large projects they come into play hugely, but we'll go through a very simple functionality that has helped me hugely in the long run. To organize the session using memory locations. So what you would want to do is to add a new marker, and the reason I would say you do this as a template or to do this before you have laid out the markers for your session is so that they are the number 1 and that we have an accessible keyboard shortcut in the long run. I'll go through that in a second. So to create a memory location that shows us views, we would use the track show hide option. And this will then allow us to include certain tracks in our view. So you can see here in this very large session, I would then be able to organize all of my tracks into particular views. So you can see now we're only showing the drums and we're showing the stems as well. That's because in every view I have the stems shown, and then I'll just include whatever is in that view. So here's just the bass, here's just the keys, and there was no keys obviously. Here's just the strings. So if I go to my edit window, it's the same thing. You can see how I would clean up what was this and finding my strings instantly into this, and my strings are right in front of me. So again, to do that, we would add a marker, and preferably before we've set up any of the markers for the session's timeline, like the intro and the verse and etc., we would select the time properties to be none, and that's how it ends up not showing up as a time property up here. We could name it whatever view we want it to be called, and then we would enable track show hide. You could also enable zoom settings and zoom out when you're saving it so that it looks good. So that would be, for example, doing this. I'm already on my zoom tool. I'll hold Alt to zoom out. So maybe I would set the view like this, so whenever I come to my strings, I'll just be right there looking over it. I could also leave it off so that if I was zoomed in, if I was very zoomed in and I wanted to switch to a different view, I'll stay in the same place, but I'll be looking at a different set of channels. So you can see I want to look at my strings, and then very quickly I want to go to my Vox. It's there. Now that's because I haven't saved these zoom settings for these memory locations. So if you want to edit a memory location, you can right click it and it will show up. And you can see here that memory location number 7 here is my Vox view, and the track show hide and track heights are enabled so that they'll always show up as a certain height and won't, default to having one very large and loads of them really small or something like that. Whatever way I had been working on it, it will return to the same. So you would just then click OK to save. And what that would allow you to do again is, move between the session extremely easy. This is my top tip, because once I started working on large sessions, things got very hairy very quickly, and instantly you would recognize a problem once you start to edit the session. Now, again, this is just the dry edit. This was just the levels. Once you start to get into editing all these and cleaning them up and doing batch fades and all of this kind of stuff, you'll get lost pretty quickly in the long run. So using these views, which we've set up from the start, you can switch very quickly between all of your different track groups, however you want to group them as well. This might be dialogue of certain actors, or I don't know, a certain other grouping of effects that you want to put together for some reason and edit together in a certain view. If you had a huge session, this is extremely handy. The other better point on this as well is that there is a keyboard shortcut for it. So I don't have a numeric keypad on me even at the moment. It happens, I have a Windows one that I use with my Mac that happens not to be here. But for you can type, so it would be the stop or the period on the numeric keypad. So it shows up here for me, but on your numeric keypad, and the numbers, numpad, but the numbers from the numeric keypad that associate with the group. So what you would do is, if you wanted to switch to now this is not going to work for me, and I'm going to go to my mix window just in case I change anything in the edit, but what you would do is type .1 to go to your all view, and then .2 to go to your stems view. Now, because I don't have my numeric keypad, the keystrokes .to do nothing because they're on the standard keyboard view. But on your numeric keypad, the stop or dot or period, it would stop would give you the stems view. It would cause this behavior, whatever you had set for that memory location. Of course, if these were markers that were in the timeline, you could, for instance, set it so that .1 was your intro, and .2 was your verse 1, and .3 was your chorus, etc. So you can use this in a myriad of ways, but this is how I use it to organize my large sessions. As I say, once you start getting into this, you'll find it extremely handy. Now, the reason they show up like this again is because I have gone through the trouble of sitting down and, let's say, hiding other tracks, hiding all of these tracks here and showing just my drums, my stems, and my master bus, and then saving a new memory location called, so here's the dialogue that would come up, called drums view, for example. The time properties are none, and the track show hide and heights or not, just primarily the show hide. You could use the zoom settings again to return to whatever zoom you're at right now, or the track heights to show the same heights. I normally go track show hide and track heights. And then if you save that as drums view, let's say, and it was the third memory location, it would be here. And so on, same process then. I would go through and hide the drums, show the bass, save a new memory location. I would call it base view and select the time properties to none, etc. You can see if I went and created a new one here in the empty slot I managed to screw up with, number 9, and I didn't change the time property, so I'll bring it up here and I'll leave it called location 9, and I'll let it be a marker at a bar beat reference, and I click OK, you'll see location 9 pops up here, and all of a sudden we've got a marker. But this is just now location 9. You can see the location 9's properties are set to marker up here. And then the track show hide and heights are selected for all of the others. You can see the difference here. So another handy tip then, the last one with the memory locations window, is that you could like turn off some of these functionalities if you only wanted to see tracks that had those functionalities. So if you were, for instance, working with the views only and you wanted that numeric shortcut, the number to apply only to your views, you might turn off the markers here so they wouldn't even be showing and wouldn't be active. So that's another handy tip with the memory locations window. So I'm going to go ahead and clean this up. The other thing is it's kind of weird, but in order to okay, so I'm going to have to revise on this. My Pro Tools knowledge is limited. For some reason, I was able to get rid of it, but it doesn't matter. It's the end of the video, and it's been a long day. So apologies for the, I suppose, rant, but I just wanted to again share my top 5 tips that help me every day and I hoped would help you. They're simple, but they should help really speed things up. So just to run over them quickly again, there was the edit window switching, there was our tools, our edit modes. You can see all up the top left hand corner here, our edit modes, our bounce dialog, which would come up here, Alt Command and B, color coding, which is another very handy thing, and then defaulting the clip color in the preferences to the track color. So you can see, so that all that means that is the track's color that you assign will be assigned to the clip's color as well, which is just handy that the clip always matches the track that it's on. Then we had the the groups. So using the one alphabetic shortcut to change a group on and off, which is very handy when you're in your mix window. What other ones do we have here? Is the VCA group, A and B, you can see. Easy to turn our groups on and off. The drive allocation as well to save CPU. Here it is. So you would split your you would split your session between 2 or more drives to ease CPU intensity. And the last one being the memory locations, which is my top one, which is being able to organize a very, very large session. So well, this is pretty large. Not too big, but pretty large. Being able to organize this all into, for instance, this, would be very easy to look at, very much easier to consume. And you think, oh, I want to edit some vocals. You just pop down here and click on Vox View, and there we go. So this was my top 5 tips. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you'll join me for more lessons in the future. If you have any comments or questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch, and I will see you in my next course. Thank you.